Hello and welcome to the FMCC webinar, How to Manage Human Error, the Leading Cause Behind Workplace Incidents, presented by Greg Ford. Next slide, please. I do want to let everyone know they have been muted for audio quality. And during this presentation, if you have any questions, please type them into the question box and we'll go over them during the Q&A portion of the webinar. Also, this webinar is being recorded. And we also have a new feature in the GoTo platform. If you want a PDF copy of the PowerPoint, in the control panel there's a section called Handouts. Simply click on that and you can download a PDF copy for yourself. Next slide, please. I do want to let everyone know the FMCC provides many services to the FM community, such as Ask the Expert, Find a Consultant, Locate a Speaker, and online educational resources. You may find more information at their website, fmcc.ifma.org. Next slide, please. And we would like to take this time to thank our sponsors. And the next slide, please. I do want to also remind you before we get the presentation underway, the FMCC is having a general meeting and strategic planning meeting at World Workplace. That will be Wednesday morning in the Convention Center, room 407, from 7:30 a.m. to 10 a.m. Next slide, please. And I am your moderator, Joshua Amos, the component liaison. And Greg Ford, again, CEO of TalentClick, is the presenter. And at this time, I will go ahead and turn it over to Greg.
Thank you, Josh. Welcome, everyone. And as Josh said, I am the CEO of a company called TalentClick Workforce Solutions. And I'll talk a bit more about that in a second. But just to cover the learning objectives for today, we're going to, number one, be identifying personality risk factors that impact employee behaviors. Number two, learning how to use an actual personality risk assessment to identify what we call higher risk employees. Number three, apply customized coaching plans from personality risk assessment reports to improve workplace safety in your environment. So there's my picture, that's me. And I have a background in psychology. I also have a master's degree in workplace learning. I teach part-time at one of the universities, and I have a couple of books that I've published, as well as I write for a number of HR trade publications and occupational health and safety publications as well. So you saw a picture of me as I am now. Here's a picture of me many, many years ago. And I grew up in a small town, actually, and my father was a blue-collar carpenter and plumber, and he built houses for a living. And when I worked with him trying to build houses, I was a disaster. I was the guy up on the ladder always dropping something on his head, and he would just shake his head and think, oh, you know, the genes did not pass from one to the other. So I learned as I got older that I just wasn't suited for those types of jobs, and I have a different kind of personality, different default settings. And it's okay. I learned over time that there's no sense blaming someone for being hardwired a certain way. This is just how we're born, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. In the world of safety, I firmly believe there's too much blaming the worker and punishing things that shouldn't be punishable. You know, there's a lot of what we call pencil whipping that takes place, and errors are often not deliberate acts of violation, whereas we think it's always somebody acting unsafely deliberately. Accidents are not linear. They happen in a three-dimensional way with various factors, including internal factors. Now, it could be things like stress. There's a lot of talk about fatigue management. It could be a physical impairment. We actually had one client once learn about an employee that had been working for them for many years and who didn't want to admit that his eyesight was starting to go, and that was causing some of these incidents in the workplace. So that was one of the internal factors involved. But the final one that we're going to be talking about today is personality, and I'll explain more as we go along. I don't know exactly what the rates are in your organization, of course, but in general, in terms of safety, workplace incidents are 90% caused by human error. And this is consistent throughout most organizations. Most organizations have the right equipment. There have been great strides in getting the proper equipment and machinery in place over the years. There's also been great strides in getting the right standard operating procedures and training. and yet still there are incidents. Why? It's because of the human factors at play. So here's just a brief bit of humor. In this corner we have firewalls, encryption, antivirus software, etc. And in the other corner we have Dave. So this is a serious topic, but at the same time I like to have a little bit of fun with it. So let's look at the cost of preventable injuries. On the right you'll see some fairly catastrophic incidents, but they're not always major catastrophes or disasters. Even if it's a smaller incident, the average direct cost of injury is $36,000 according to the U.S. National Safety Council. The average annual cost of workplace injuries, $50 billion a year according to Liberty Mutual Insurance. And injury costs equal 1/4 of each dollar of pre-tax corporate profits. Now this page is about injuries. They're not always injuries. Let's look at some other indirect costs. It could be property damage without an injury. It could be simply lost productivity that you're dealing with. You have to hire, train, and then pay the replacement workers. There's legal costs, there's fines, OSHA fines and penalties. You're probably doing an investigation, which takes a lot of time if there's been an incident. There could be damage to your brand or reputation. And of course there can be damage to the employee morale, not to mention customer dissatisfaction or even lost business. So some of you have probably seen this image before, but it's just a good reminder that it's not always the actual direct cost of the injury or incident. There can be a lot of indirect costs as well. When I speak at conferences and I'm in front of people face to face, I say, just play along with me for a minute and close your eyes. And I'd like you to imagine your next incident in your particular workplace. Imagine where it will be, how it will happen, and imagine who will be involved. If you can just do that for a minute, where it will take place, how it will happen, and who will be involved. Now, when I do this, I say, stick up your hand if certain people, certain actual faces and names come to mind. And generally about 50 to 60% of the room put up their hand. And why is that? Well, it's because people act in predictable ways. We are predictable creatures based on our personality default settings. Again, I'll explain more about that in a minute. I'd like you to look at this calendar. This is an annual calendar from 1980. There was an event that took place on August 8th in 1980. It was an explosion at an Exxon refinery in New Jersey. There was $5 million damage to the plant, $1.5 million in medical treatment for one man. Some of you probably know who this is. It was a gentleman called Charlie Moorcraft, and he's a great speaker. If you haven't heard of him or attended one of his sessions at the conference, I'd highly recommend it. But Charlie admitted that he did not follow proper procedures, and this is what the result of the investigation turned up as well. He ignored the shutoff valves. He left the vehicle running. He was not wearing his protective equipment. He did not have the safety glasses on. The sleeves on his Nomex fire retardant coveralls were rolled up, and he got severely burned, of course. Now, when I talked to him, I said, describe yourself, describe your personality. And he said, all my life I was a rebel. I was a risk taker. I was a thrill seeker. My behavior was a result of who I was. I was making bad choices in my life every day. He said, I was the guy sitting in the back of the safety meetings with my sunglasses on, my arms folded. Nobody could tell me a thing. And he said, looking back, it was predictable that something was going to happen sooner or later. So let's go back to this calendar. When we started digging into it with him, he said things were happening all the time. There were incidents, not necessarily daily, but very frequent, and nothing happened until it actually happened. So this is where personality risk assessments come in. It's the who is involved. It's those predictable people acting in predictable ways. A long time ago, we were working with ArcelorMittal. It's one of the biggest steel producers in the world. It's a $100 billion company. And this gentleman at one of the mine sites in northern Minnesota said, every time I hear the phone ring and I hear there's been an incident, in my mind, I'm always thinking it's one of the same 10 or 12 people. And I don't know what it is about that dirty dozen. There's just something different about them compared to all the other people on the mine site. And this is what we deal with. It's the who. It is the personality default settings. And this is the missing piece of the puzzle. As I said, you've got these other things in place, but it's time to look at, instead of a one-size-fits-all program, it's time to start tailoring the training, the coaching, and the selection of people to the individual personalities. There's lots of research focusing on this, and I'll give you some of the research data in about 15 minutes. So we're dealing with predictive analytics, and this field is exploding. I don't know if anyone has read either of these best-selling books. They were on the New York Times bestseller list. If you haven't read either of these books, you've probably seen the movie Moneyball with Brad Pitt. And of course, that was about the Oakland A's and how they used predictive analytics to help develop a winning team many years ago. So let's talk a bit about the psychology and social science behind what we do. Here's another really quick exercise. Just quickly in your mind, think, what's the riskiest thing I've ever done? Some of you might be thinking of skydiving or bungee jumping or swimming with sharks. I was at a conference once, and it might have been the IFMA conference in New Orleans last year when I asked this to the room full of people. Actually, one gentleman say, when I was a kid, I lay down between the railroad tracks while a train passed over my head. That takes the cake. That was the winner. So when you look at this photo, the kid going down the hill on the skateboard, what do you think? What's your reaction to this? Some people look at this and they clutch their chest and they envision a hospital visit and broken bones. Then there's probably a few of you right now looking at this going, cool, I want to be that kid. And I'm here to tell you there's no right or wrong reaction to this unless you're in a workplace and there's potential incident that could happen. But then there's probably some people in the middle that analyze this and look at the slope, the degree of the angle of the hill, and look at whether there might be pebbles that could trip up the wheels on the way down, look at whether there's actually a hole in the fence at the bottom, look at whether there's holes between the boards out on the boardwalk that the wheels could get caught in. And that's a more highly analytical personality. Now, how do you react to this? Most people know what to do. You come to a full 3-second stop and then you proceed with caution. But when it's late at night and you're in your own familiar neighborhood and there's no one around, do you still adhere to the rule? Now, if you're like me, you probably don't. You come to what we call the California stop and we kind of cruise through it. But then invariably in a conference, when I ask people who always stops, even late at night in your neighborhood with no one around, at least 3 or 4 people put up their hand. And I say, why do you do this? And they say, what do you mean? It's because that's the rule. There are people hardwired that way, that always follow the rules. They're very compliant. That's their natural hardwiring. So this is what we're talking about. You've heard me use terms like default settings, hardwiring. It's our natural impulses and urges. Another way to look at it, it's how we act when nobody's looking. And this is really a good way to look at it because if you're managing facilities, chances are you can't be watching people all the time. And even if you have cameras mounted in the sky, it's not a great culture to have cameras so-called catching people doing things wrong all the time. That becomes a very negative environment. And you heard me at the outset say there's too much blaming the worker. So personality is a causal factor that does drive behavior. I also want to say that personality is quite resistant to change. We're not here to change personalities. We're here to make people more self-aware, to make the employers, the coaches, the supervisors, the foremen more aware of who they're dealing with, what kind of different personalities they have on the team, and then how to communicate and lead differently based on those people's personalities. So there are a number of steps. The first step is the awareness. How do we become aware or learn about what that personality is in others or in ourselves? The second is the coaching. You heard me talk about how the foreman or supervisor can work with that person for improvement. And the third is the actual behavioral change. And I will at the end show you some data that shows this stuff actually does work. It's all fine and well to say this is great theory, but where does the rubber meet the road? How do we actually affect change? I will show you some of that in a minute. Now, here's just sort of a sample of one type of personality assessment, and there's usually different kinds of dimensions or scales that are correlated to safety risk. This particular one happens to be our assessment. So you'll see on the left there's rule resistant, or what we call defiant. There's an anxious personality. There's someone who's reactive, or it can also be called impatient or irritable. There's the distractible personality type. There's someone who's impulsive. The person doesn't really think about the consequences of their actions. And the final one is thrill-seeking. Now, by the way, I take a risk on most of these things, and a lot of you might as well, especially if you're in a management position. Chances are you got to a management role because you don't like routine and doing the same thing over and over every day, or you like to think outside the box and challenge the status quo. And this is okay. It's all about job fit, and you're probably not a good fit for that frontline factory role, for instance. Let's go through the different personality dimensions very quickly. This one is the, as I said, the defiant personality, whereas the opposite is someone who is accommodating and tends to take comfort in the rules and guidelines. Just a quick apology, I'm not sure why the text is not all falling within that gray box. It did before when I went through the run-through, but anyway, what do we do with that? Here's an example of self-coaching. So what we would often do is give the results of that assessment to the actual employee and have them work through a workbook and have them think about their own results. And this is where the self-awareness comes in. The first step to improvement or change in our behaviors, and this applies to anything. It could be weight loss or cessation of smoking or anything, is to become more self-aware. And so we call it a safety self-awareness workbook. It really gets them thinking about how they can apply the knowledge to their own particular situations and then act differently. Now, we're not here to say that this is a magic silver bullet and 100% of your workers are immediately going to start becoming self-aware and start changing their behaviors. But we find most organizations do see gradual improvement, and maybe 50, 60, even 70% of their workforce will start having epiphanies. And that's a word we've heard from a client, not our word. They said our guys are having epiphanies. These are a lot of so-called blue-collar workers that nobody's ever really talked to them about this kind of stuff before. They haven't learned about the Myers-Briggs assessments and personality and so on. And a lot of them do find it interesting. Going through the entire self-awareness and self-coaching piece would be an entirely another, not just a webinar, but it's a 2 or 3 hour workshop, and I don't have time to cover that today. But I just want to put this on your radar, just screen that this is one of the applications of the actual assessment data. Now, if you're a coach or supervisor or manager, what can you do with the data? Well, here are some tips. So this is for a resistant personality. You might have to remember that this person you're dealing with may know, they need to understand that they have to be compliant, but you can't just tell them. They will benefit from knowing the reasons behind the rules. Often a defiant personality, once they feel respected and heard, will go, yeah, okay, I guess that makes sense. And that's when they'll start being a little more compliant, and they'll quit, bickering, if you will, with you or with others in the workplace. And these are some actual, some language, some word tracking that you can use. The foreman or manager could say, listen, Joe Smith, you've got to ask me when you need to know the reasons for something, and I'll explain it. And storytelling is often a good way to help someone understand why something is in place. You could say, Joe, here's why the rule's in place. 9 months ago, we had someone on the job, and I'm going to use a real example right now. We had someone on the job at the construction site, and there was a crane loading steel beams into place. And normally, what you have to do is use your long-handled screwdriver to stick up through the bottom of the steel girder. There are some holes there, and that's how you align the steel girders. This person didn't do that. He thought it was fine to use his fingers to stick up through there. The steel beam shifted and he sheared off both of his fingers. That's a real story that we heard from one of our customers. So when you start using real stories like that, often a rule-resistant person thinks, okay, thanks for taking the time to explain that to me, now it makes sense. And they can then become a champion or advocate for adhering to the rules with others on the team as well. If not, they can also be your biggest agitator. The coaching has to come from a place of concern. It has to be that two-way dialogue, not the one-way lecture or shaking the finger at someone. You've heard me use the term pencil whipping. That positive reinforcement is really important, especially with that defiant personality, focusing on the right behavior as opposed to the negative behaviors. Let's move on to the next personality dimension. This is someone who's a bit more anxious versus the calm and steady individual. Anxious people may panic and freeze in unpredictable situations. It doesn't mean they will, but they might. Whereas a more calm individual tends to usually think clearly and remain calm, even in unpredictable situations. And this is what is important. It's when there's something that unpredictable pops up. It's that unforeseen sudden crisis. What do? Do they freeze, or are they acting calmly all the time? So back to the coaching tips. If you're a manager, you know, that person may need to be reminded that mistakes are opportunity, improvement opportunities. They should be encouraged to build self-confidence through skills development. Sometimes a more anxious person can be a little less self-confident, and you have to be there to really, you know, stroke their ego and make sure they know that you're behind them. Some actual language you can use can be things like, let's try to limit your time working in high stress and pressure-filled situations. You know, come talk to me whenever you need to. I'm here for you. I'm not going to be this distant, aloof manager. You know, let's talk about ideas for improvement for you. And that dialogue is really important for this kind of person. Let's move on and talk about the impatient person. This is the irritable person. And on the road, this translates into road rage. So these people do tend to, you know, take things a bit more personally, become quickly agitated and irritated, whereas more patient people, and we all know them, rarely show emotion. This is an interesting one because when you get these kinds of opposite ends of the spectrum working together, often there's a disconnect. The impatient person looks at the patient person and thinks, you know, you don't care. You just don't give a crap. Whereas often they do. They just don't play it. They don't have to, there's not drama all the time. And the patient person is often looking at that impatient person as a hothead and a cowboy and thinking, what's wrong? Why can't he just chill out? And once we, again, use this as a communication tool and make them aware not just of themselves and how they're hardwired, but that other person, how that person is hardwired, that's when we also start to see epiphanies, and they look at each other, and we can use humor. We do when we do workshops and say, you know, you guys, it's okay to laugh about this and realize often why there's a disconnect and you're sometimes just not getting along. So back to some coaching tips. You know, this impatient person may need encouragement to let go of grudges or disappointments. They definitely benefit from positive performance feedback. This is another kind of personality type that can very quickly become, you know, too negative and start agitating those around them. You know, actual word tracking can be, you know, count to 10, make sure you cool off. Anger management classes talk about this kind of thing, counting to 10, not taking things personally, concentrate on things you can control. I'll use an example, and I'll use a driving example because everyone can relate to driving. I do tend to score a bit higher on this impatient, irritable score. And when I'm on the road, if somebody cuts me off, my natural impulse is to get angry with that person. And the old Greg would want to speed up beside them and glare at them and possibly even flip them a middle-fingered salute. And I would take it personally. And now I still have that natural, you know, lightning reaction or impulse. As I said, the personality hasn't changed. But now I change my behavior with different self-talk. And the self-talk is, Greg, you know you're hardwired this way. Let it go. They didn't do it to you personally. They Maybe they didn't even see you here in this lane. It could have been anyone. 5 seconds earlier or later, it would have been a different car here. Or Greg, maybe that person's late for an urgent appointment. Or Greg, have you ever made a mistake on the road? Let this be that one mistake for that person today. And all that self-talk happens within a second or two, and it quickly diffuses things in my mind. So that's the pattern interrupt. That's how we start changing behaviors with this self-awareness, or how a coach or supervisor can start to help change that as well in that individual. And it does work. As I said, not for 100% of the people 100% of the time, but you will definitely find an incremental gain with this kind of tool. Let's move on, and we're almost finished here. A distractible person, they need variety and stimulation. They can easily become bored, inattentive, and lose focus, whereas focused people are quite happy. You know, they take comfort in doing the same thing all the time. And these are the people that can work on a factory line or go in and do the same thing day in and day out. They're quite vigilant, and the world needs these people. They can be wonderful employees. Now, so can the distractible person. As I said, often managers thrive on the variety and the stimulation and chaos and so on. A distractible person, if you're coaching this individual, they may not be suited to roles that require long periods of independent work. They could be best suited for roles that involve limited amounts of repetitive or routine tasks. So when you're talking to this kind of individual, you can say things like, you may become bored or restless quickly. You know, we've got to break your work up into chunks throughout the day. I'm going to try and move you around. And if you're feeling bored, you know, come talk to me. Let's go give you a smoke break or coffee break or what have you. I don't know if you have the ability in your organization to shift someone around, not just throughout the day or week, but to move them into an actual different job every few months or every year or something. You know, think about that kind of thing. Impulsive. The impulsive person is prone to taking unnecessary risks. This is the person who doesn't think through the consequences of their actions, whereas the opposite person does tend to think through those options and analyze the risk. If you think through, or think back to that kid on the skateboard a few minutes ago, the cautious person you know, may still want to go down that hill, but they're the ones analyzing the pitch, analyzing are there pebbles, analyzing is there a hole in that gate at the bottom, are there holes between the slats on the boardwalk, and so on. So if you're supervising this individual, you have to remind them of the consequences of their actions. And again, storytelling really works well with this as well, because they're not thinking through, they're not connecting the dots from A to B. And you can say, you know, here's a story. I'll use another real-life example. There was someone that went into an oxygen-depleted environment, not wearing their mask. And you could say to that person, we caught them doing it. We told them not to do it again. The person said, don't worry, it won't happen again. We caught them doing it again a few weeks later, and they said, you know what, sorry, final time, it won't happen again. Well, guess what? They did it again, and it was game over for that individual. It happened that quickly. And that's helping that individual in front of you think through the consequences of the action with a real-life example. The rule or standard operating procedure becomes real at that point, and it's justified. So some actual language, you know, hey, Joe, you really can't become overconfident. I know you're a confident person in life, and that's awesome, but around here, there's reasons that we have these operating procedures in place, and you have to always think through what could happen. I need you to resist the temptation to bend the rules and policies, and just really having that one-on-one dialogue with that person. There's a lot more to what I'm talking about than just showing you these tips on the screen right now, but again, that kind of, you know, train the trainer or coach the coach session takes a bit more than what we have time for today. Here's the final personality dimension. This is the person who loves the thrills and adrenaline and uncertainty. They're very comfortable with uncertainty, whereas an apprehensive person at the other end of the spectrum avoids uncertainty and the risk, usually in their personal lives and during the workplace as well. I'll give you another example. There was a client that had a warehouse, and there were forklift drivers, and when things were quiet in the evening, they would actually set up an obstacle course and race the forklifts around the perimeter of the warehouse because they loved the adrenaline. They were seeking a thrill, they were bored, and they caught them doing this, and they just, it was crazy. So they had to say to these people things like, you just can't be doing this. I need to help you understand why that rule is in place. You know, storytelling works well for these guys as well. And you just, with some of these people, sometimes the dialogue works, but sometimes you just have to actually put your foot down and be very firm with these individuals and just say, it cannot be tolerated. If it happens again, you're out of here. So you've heard me cover off some of the higher level things, such as managers may score higher risk. There's no right or wrong personality. It's important to communicate to some of these employees if they're actually doing this and they're apprehensive about doing the assessment to say, look, we're not going to be making termination decisions or disciplinary action based on your personality. This is just how you were born. We wouldn't discipline someone for being, you know, outgoing and extroverted or introverted and quiet. And we're not going to discipline you for being distractible or, you know, a bit more of a thrill seeker. We just really want to help you. We give you tools. We give you hard hats or PPE or, you know, safety glasses, whatever it might be. This is another tool outside the box, but nonetheless, we're here to help you get home safe at the end of the day. We're on your side. The third bullet point down, I want to communicate to you that a high score, a higher risk score, only indicates that there's a probability of the person acting in unsafe ways. It doesn't mean there's certainty involved. We deal with research. We deal with stats and probability. And kind of a crude analogy I'll use is smoking. Someone could smoke all his life and not get cancer, but there's a much greater probability of that happening. Conversely, someone may not ever smoke and still get lung cancer, but there's a less of a likelihood, less of a statistical probability of that happening. Okay. There is proven validity and reliability around this kind of thing. The organizations like us that do this have case studies and lots of research and technical manuals, and it does get peer reviewed, and so there is very strong social science behind it. I want to show you one particular case study. This was done with thousands of workers at with a construction organization based out of Nebraska. And they gave us their actual safety data. They gave us 40,000 data points. It was not just injuries, but near misses and first aid, clinic visits, all that kind of thing. And we correlated the results of their safety data with the personality assessment results. And it was really interesting. The workers who scored more impulsive had an actual incident rate in the past 5 times higher than those with low or average scores. It was really interesting. So what they're doing now is working more with the people who have impulsive personality scores. And remember, that's someone who doesn't think through the consequences of the actions. And they're really working on storytelling and helping them understand what can happen in the future if you disregard those procedures. Now here's something interesting as well. It's not just the frontline workers, but it was their supervisors or foremen. When those managers had a more resistant score, they had an average crew incident rate 2.3 times higher than those crews with a low, those supervisors with a low and average score. And this was really puzzling to us. Now to compound that, supervisors who were more irritable or impatient had an average crew incident rate 4 times higher than those with low scores. And we started talking with this construction company and trying to figure out why it was, and it became more obvious that the foremen who were more resistant and irritable were saying things to their crew members such as, you know, look, we're behind, we just have to get this done, just do it. You know, don't ask questions. I don't know why the rule's in place, it's just in place, just do it. And they had kind of unapproachable, abrasive personalities. So nobody wanted to go to them and ask questions. Nobody wanted to say, am I doing this right? They just would take a chance and do it. And that's often when members of the crew had an incident that would take place. So this organization is now doing a lot of training with the supervisors and foremen on how to manage themselves and how to communicate more effectively to the crew members. Keep in mind, many organizations that have, shall we say, more blue-collar workers often promote those blue-collar workers into a management role because they're the best pipe fitter or carpenter or electrician or whatever it might be. And that's great, but often they're promoting those people that don't have the best leadership or communication skills. Sometimes they do, and sometimes they give them the leadership training and coaching, and they turn into wonderful leaders, but sometimes they don't. They're just hardwired differently. Those people thrive in the frontline role, just doing their trade, and that's okay. All right, so I'm going to move on. We're almost done here, but this is a continuous improvement cycle. I'm not here to say this is a one and done thing. We always have employee turnover, so that's one of the reasons why it can't be a one and done thing. Often there's people coming into the organization and leaving, or they get promoted. So it's a continuous cycle of analyzing, understanding, planning, coaching, training, and then measuring the results of this. I said I would show you a bit of data. Sorry, again, the title has shifted a bit outside the box, but this is what one organization has achieved since 2011, since we started working with them. We assessed over 7,000 of their people, and in the 4 years since, they have seen an 82% decrease in first aid incidents, 89% decrease in property damage, 46% decrease in recordables, and 59% reduction in incidents. Now, there's the fine print at the bottom. I want to make it clear that we're not here to say this was all us. You know, we're the sole reason for these gains. We're just part of a safety program. We're not the magic solution or silver bullet, as I've said. But let's just put it this way, we were one of the only things that they did change in the 4-year period of time, and they're very pleased with what we've done. This is not a commercial or advertisement for us. There are other organizations out there that do what we do, and I would encourage you to explore and have a look at this concept in general, and perhaps talk to one of those organizations as well. All I'm here to say today is that this is a new piece of the safety puzzle that is gaining popularity. It's a new trend. As I mentioned, you've got the proper equipment, probably, the proper standard operating procedures, probably. And here's another piece of the puzzle that a lot of organizations are not thinking of, and I would encourage you to think about it. So that's about it, just a few takeaway points. Human error is definitely linked to personality, and it is predictable and it is measurable, especially in frontline individuals in safety-sensitive situations. And finally, the actual behavioral change and incident reduction can indeed come from the self-awareness and the coaching. I'll leave a final story with you to think about, and this comes from Charlie Moorcraft again. When he was in the hospital for over a year dealing with his severe burns, he saw so many other burn victims in there, and he said, you know, there were 3 things that they always said. He said, it happened so fast. I never thought it would happen to me. And I wish I could go back and do things over. So when I talked with Charlie about the work that we do and the research and training and so on, he said, you know what, this is one of the do-overs. And I wish we knew about this kind of thing a long time ago. So I would encourage you to think about this and, you know, explore it a bit further. My contact information is here. We've also written a book, Self-Awareness. It's available on Amazon. That's a little plug there, but there's my email address and phone number. And feel free, if you just want to have a conversation, I'm willing to do that myself. We'll put you in touch with one of the organizational members we have. So Josh, that's about it. I'm going to turn it back over to you at this point.
Great.
Go ahead.
Just a reminder, if any of you have any questions, please type them into the question box so we can go over them. And we'll give them a moment to see if they have any questions. And then if you want, you can go to the next slide. The discussion is, don't forget to register. We do have upcoming webinars, and the FMCC does have that up on their website, fmcc.ifma.org/events. You can probably just go to the home page and click events, so you can always register for them there. And again, another reminder for the World Workplace meeting Wednesday morning. There will be a meeting from 7:30 a.m. to 10 o'clock a.m. and that will be in Convention Room 407. Okay, and then, like Greg said, if you do have any follow-up questions that we don't get to today, you can certainly just reach out to him. I'm sure he would be happy to. Give me just one moment. Okay, I want to thank everyone for joining us. If you could go to the next slide. The FMCC does like to make everyone aware of the other councils that are out there and the value that they bring. And I think, is there one more slide or is that all? That's all. Okay. Yep, I want to thank everyone for joining us. You have a great day. And Greg, thanks for a great presentation.
You're welcome. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.